gives you a runnable project that includes things like grouping, and this is kind of what we're going to recreate. You've got this hub section, you've got a couple of sections of content. You can kind of go in, see the details, you know, just look at different items, you know, just kind of giving you an idea of what you can do. Yeah, I literally did file new, created the project, and you get this out of the box. I just ran it. I didn't do anything else. You get this for free. And if you then run that same project in Windows Phone, you kind of get the same thing. And this is where the whole idea of universal apps comes from. If you're in Visual Studio, when you create this project, you have a Windows version and a Windows Phone version, as I said, and you can kind of switch between that context. Here in this drop-down menu, you can actually select the startup project that you want. In this case, we have Windows 8 is what I launched. And then in this, now I'm going to switch it to Windows Phone. So if I do that, and I just start the project like I did before, it's going to launch the emulator, and it's going to launch that same application, but this time it's going to launch it in the Windows Phone. So it's sharing that same kind of concept. If you remember what it showed before, we've got groups of items. Here we've got sections of content. You can select one of those items and then see the details, go back. You know, not very useful, but certainly representative of something that you would expect to see in an application. And it kind of also demonstrates the idea of how the data model here, and again, don't think too much about what these data models actually represent. The idea is there is a collection of data that represents these things, these items, these sections, and they are shared between the two projects. So within the shared project here, I have something called this sample data, and if we look at it, it's just, you know, let me make this a little bit bigger. You know, this is where all of that information comes from. Here's the title, here's the subtitle, here's the content that's in there. And it's in the shared project, which means that exact same content will be available both in the Windows Phone and the Windows, so they're identical. And so the idea is that you build your application model, you build all of your data inside of this shared component, and then on the front end, in each head target for Windows Phone or Windows 8, you just build a user interface that will present that information. So for example, here's the hub page for the Windows 8 version. And you can see here on the side you get this nice visual representation of the application. And then again, within the Windows Phone section, you have the complementary hub page view. And in that case, you'll get a Windows Phone representation of the information. But the data within this is the same. I didn't make two copies of it. I didn't make two copies of the sections or the content within them. They're identical. They just get projected into each project.
Are they two template files, or is it one template file that is responsive to both platforms?
It is possible to create a single view. And if you put that single view inside the shared project, it will also get projected into both. So if I was to make say a landing page that said, "Welcome to my app," I could define it in the shared project only. And when I run the application, that shared file will be loaded in both the Windows app and the Windows Phone app. The issue with that is currently the tooling makes it a little bit difficult for you to be responsive in sharing the templates. So for the most part, if you are targeting both platforms, you do want to have two copies of your view. But again, that view is nothing but user interface. It's just what lays it out. All of the behavior, all of the data is shared. And that's, of course, the core of your application. So that is just a quick and dirty run through. What we want to do is we want to create a new project and start from scratch and see how we can create something that will share that information and create hopefully something usable. Now bear with me, I only did this once. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to select the blank application, and I'm going to put this in a different folder. Okay, let's put this here. Demo. All right. So when you're developing an application, the first thing you want to think about is the what your application is going to do and how you can isolate the behavior and the data that represents what your application actually does. And without going into too much detail about what what I've done here, basically I'm going to construct a container for my data. And in Windows Phone, and or rather in Windows Universal, that container, we call it a view model. And that view model represents all of the data and behavior that your application screen is going to need. So if you've got a main page, which is the landing page of your application, you'll have a corresponding main page view model that contains all of that data and information that your application is going to present. So if I'm going to do that, I've got a main page here in Windows 8 and a main page here in Windows Phone that of course are blank. And what I want to do is I want to create that view model that's going to contain that data. And since I want to share that data between both platforms, I'm going to create it in the shared project. So I'll go ahead and just add a quick folder. And I totally forgot to record my screen, so I'm going to do that right now. Okay. So I'm going to call this folder 3, 2, 1, boop. Okay, so I'm going to call that folder View Models. And I'm going to add a new item. And this new item is going to be the main page view model. And this view model is simply a class that, which is just an object that represents the information that's going to be persisted in that. Now, has anybody not know object-oriented programming, C# classes? Anybody not know what that means when I say a class? Okay, a class is, without going into too much detail, it is basically a concept that encapsulates the behavior. So when I said that container is the main page view model, this is simply the definition of that and the syntax that defines that. So that this class is the representation of that data. So if I go ahead and then within this main page view model, I'm going to define the properties that I want to present in my application. So what is my application going to do? I guess I should start there. The application that I'm going to create is simply going to present a grouping of colors that, you know what, let me show it to you. This is what we're going to create. Yeah. Give me. Uh-oh, where'd he go? Play. There we go. Stop it. There it is. Okay, here's what we're creating. This is a collection of just colors in groups. And you can think of this as an application that you were building, say, like for a newspaper. You know, here's your headlines, here's your lifestyle section, here's your sports section. These are all just articles. When I select one, I'll go into it and I'll see even more articles. And when I select the article, you know, you can kind of just, this is kind of representative of selecting an item. So nothing too fancy, but it kind of demonstrates the idea of, you know, presenting a group of items, going into that item, selecting an item, and doing something with that item. So this is what we want to recreate. This is what we want to create. So this right here that you're looking at is the main page. So what does our main page need to present? It needs to present groups of data, group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And within each group, we need to present a collection of items, in this case, colors. And that's what our information our application is going to show. And again, this is analogous to, headlines and articles, or blog posts and categories. So we need to define within our view model the information that we want that main page to present. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a collection of that color group. And that color group is going to be called color groups. Now don't worry too much about the syntax. Again, this is all conceptual. Basically what I've defined here is that collection of groups. When you saw that group 1, group 2, group 3, that collection of groups is what I've just defined right here. Make sense? So that collection of groups, let's go ahead and color group doesn't exist because obviously I just made it up for my application. So now let's create that color group. So we'll go ahead and create a new place to hold that, a new class to hold that concept. We'll call that color group. So what does the color group need to have? Well, the color group needs to have a, what are the properties that a color group has? Well, it's going to, oh, sorry. It needs to have a name, and it needs to have a, this is the group, right? The group has a name. Again, let me show it to you. Doing that. The group has a name, here in this case group 1, but it also has a collection of colors, right? So we need to give that property a collection of colors. So let's do that. So we need to have another collection of colors. And we'll call that colors. Okay? Yes, and I would love to be able to do a course on just C# and tell you exactly what this is. But again, I don't want you to get bogged down with the syntax of the code. This is just follow the conceptual thing. What have I done here? I created a color group, and that color group represents each one of those groups. And within each one of those groups, that group needs a name, and that group needs a collection of colors, which represents each one of those squares. So now that we got that far, what does each one of those squares have? Each one of those squares is a color. That's the color info. So let's define that. Yet again, we'll create another class. And this color, what does the color square need? Well, the color square needs also a name. Obviously, we want to give it a name. Oh, yeah. Name. And the most important thing that it needs is a color. So now we have a class, again, color infos, not infox. So now we have a color represented by the name and the color. So this class represents one of those little squares. And that collection of little squares, let me pull that back up here. This square here and this square here, each one of these squares is a color. And each one of those colors has a name. And then above that, you have the group, which contains the collection of colors, and the group itself, which is the entity. So we've got, just to recap, the color group, which represents each one of those groups. And within each one of those groups is a collection of colors. And those colors are defined by the color info. And the color info, again, is a name and a color. So we've got collection of collection of collection.
Using like the Windows platform to create that app?
Yes. And if you look at this color right here, this color definition, this is actually a Windows construct. So here, Windows UI color, this is actually an internal defined object called color that is inside that we can use to represent those different colors. So now that we've, oops, let me delete that. Yeah, what did I do? Oh, you're right. I need to erase this guy. Delete color info.
I heard that Windows actually has the most potential more than the Apple and Android market.
What are you trying to say?
Huh? Because they're already those two markets are already pretty established, but the Windows market is still they're trying to gain ground.
For development.
The potential for growth is definitely there.
So that's an article I read. I think it was on The Economist or something like that. I read those articles.
Yeah.
And that was one of them that came out on that the Windows market has the most potential.
I think Josh has also been saying is that the code is
your namespace.
shared.
The what?
Yeah, but it's not.
No, name app. That one's the view models. The other one's app one model.
Yeah, but it should have. It's still not resolving. Why is it resolving? Let's try build.
So when you do create this app, it will be on the Windows market, or how do you go about that?
Yes, you would submit that to the store, and when you create an application, you have the ability to then create. Oops.
Huh?
Namespace?
Yeah, something's wrong with the namespace, but it's not resolving right.
Yeah, I don't know what the heck am I doing wrong. Color group.
Yeah, that one says app,
App
1
one
model.
model, right?
And the other one says app 1 view model.
View models.
Right, but I should be able to pull them in.
You should be able to do the using app one model.
Wait, don't you need to go to the one that includes that uses the other one? You need to use it on that one?
No, it's this one. He has to have the but he tried putting the using
Yeah,
it.
that didn't work.
It didn't work. Fully define this in front of there. You know how to fully define?
Oh yeah.
Just fully define it. See, app. It didn't.
It's not finding the
It's not
view
there.
models?
What the heck? What am I doing wrong?
Right click on code info.
Damn demos?
No, right click on code info and see if it's included as a compile.
Yeah, no, it definitely is.
No, it's compiled. No.
So this is typical of you have to debug.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I had planned on really building this out piece by piece, but what I would really like to do is focus on the actual Windows application part of it. So
The layout of it?
yeah, actually getting into the building of the user interface and the two different sections. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just bring in everything from the other. You remember how I said that the shared project projects your files into the others? I define the model only in the Windows Phone project. I need to move this out of the Windows project into the shared project so that now it's available.
Why wouldn't it see
Because it was failing on the Windows side.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what I was doing wrong. All right, there we go. See, now the using is there. All right, so I didn't have to abandon everything. Excellent. Yep. So one of the things that I'm doing here that I'm kind of going to gloss over because, good God, it's late. I built a couple of helper methods, and again, I'm checking all of this into GitHub so that you can actually see the completed project in action. The only thing that this does is it generates all of the colors. It gets them from the system and just kind of puts them into a list. And then there's a helper here that will allow you to show or hide things. The bindable base allows you to just kind of update the user interface. So all of this stuff is just boilerplate code that you do want to understand how it works, but it's really outside of the scope of this thing. So now that we've got this in place, the next thing, and I did it again, I put it in the Windows Phone project instead of the shared project, so let me move that. Got, so we've defined the models that represent the groups, that represent the collection of colors, and that represent the individual colors. So now let's turn that into let's now put that into our interface. And in order to do that, to make that easier, Microsoft has a great tool called Blend, and Blend comes installed with Visual Studio. There are two sides of the same coin. Visual Studio is used for developing the code. Blend, it gives you the tools to develop your interface. So when you open up a project in Blend, it's kind of like a sister application. You see, we still got the user interface that we had over here. You've got here's the Windows 8 representation of your application. And here's the same solution. If you can see here, you probably can't see here, but here, this list of folders corresponds to this list of folders in our project. So here we got the Windows 8 project. Here we've got the Windows Phone project. In Blend, we also have the same, this is basically the exact same thing. Here's the Windows, here's the Windows Phone. It's the exact same solution, but it gives you a different interface for interacting with your application. So if I open up the main page, I'm presenting with a more visual view, and we can start building our interface. And the way that we do that is here in our main page. I'll go ahead and look at this data tab, and see, I don't know how well that comes out here on the side, but in the data tab, it gives you oh shoot, I skipped a step. Oh, there's so many things to cover.
How is that Blend interface compared to the what you see is what you get interface on previous Visual Studio?
Well, one of the things that I didn't talk about was when you're developing applications in Windows, you're basically developing the user interface in what's called XAML. And if anybody has ever built with HTML or is familiar with HTML, it's a very representative markup language. So here I've got a grid. Let me make this bigger so you can see it. I've got a grid. I've got a grid view. There's some properties inside of that, and that represents this interface.
Blend creating that markup language then?
Yes, and that's exactly what I want to show you. So we built the view model, right, which represents the data. So what we want to do then is put that view model into our view, which is the actual screen. So this is the syntax that does it. Here you can see here's our main page view model, right? That's the one we just defined. So if we put that into the grid, or rather into the view, then we will, again, this is all just syntax, so don't worry about what this is doing. This is just allowing me to, yes. So here, what I've done is I've told my view, this screen, the main view screen, this is the view model for my screen. So use that when you're building your screen, right? So when I do that, what that tells Blend is, and you can see here it's telling me, hey, something changed, reload. So I'm going to reload it. What that does is here on the Data tab, it now realizes you've got a view model on your screen. I bet you want to use it. And what's inside of that view model? We've got color groups. And again, this is probably a little difficult to read, but right here is where I'm pointing at. So there, inside of this main page view model right there, that is the main view model that we created. And it's recognizing that that contains colors and it contains group color, right? So here's where the magic really happens. Inside of Blend, now that you've told Blend that you have this data, we can now select that colors property and drag it straight onto our grid, which represents the view. Basically, I'm dragging it onto the page. And when we do that, oh, let me actually, I skipped one step, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-populate the view model with data. So we can just copy that from my existing one. I'm going to tell that view model, when you load, go ahead and load some sample data. So let me do that here. Where is that? Where is that information at?
Yes, in that I have now most of what I did, the previous versions of this environment, you would build the Windows form in an editor type of thing. You wouldn't jump to a blend. So blend for me, blend is new, and you're dealing with a very static form.
This actually reminds me a lot of like concepts that I've been learning just developing websites, really. Yeah. It's you separate everything out. You want to do a VVM, right? MVVM presentation at some point.
Yes, and that's exactly what this is. But yeah, I mean, to dive deeper into that, I would really love to do that. MVVM stands for ModelView and it's really just that concept where you've got a separation of your data and your view. You define all of your properties and your behavior inside of this separate class, and then you just project it into your view, and the view knows exactly what to do.
Did you get inspired by other languages?
Well, the design pattern is actually ModelView Presenter, which, if I'm not mistaken, was created by Martin Fowler, if I'm not mistaken, which I probably am. But there's a lot of offshoots of it, like MVC, if you've ever heard of, like Ruby on Rails definitely has that MVC paradigm, and it really just follows that whole idea of putting your code in one section and having your UI just project that information out there. So what? And Oma, I'm counting on you to cut all of this crap out because I don't know where the heck my stuff is doing. Oh, here it is. Main page model. Here it is.
Yes,
Okay, here we are. So what I've done is, the only thing that I've done here is I've told that, I told my view model, which we created, which again just defines all of those structures, that when you get instantiated, when you get used by the application, fill in some sample data. And that's what I've done. So now when I go back to Blend and I tell it, and it recognizes that I've got that information, it still doesn't work. Damn it. Oh, because it didn't compile, you're right. There we go. Because I'm missing a using, I'm sorry.
So you have to it has to compile before, they're two separate programs, so you can't develop your user, I'm used to developing user interfaces forms within the application. This is two separate applications. You got to build one.
There we go.
Do they compile? You got three projects. Is it exe, exe, DLL, the DLL shared, or do they merge and you just get two EXEs?
Well, there's no exe because it's Windows. The Universal has a different container for it, but the idea is the same. When you open an application in Blend, you're opening the same application. You're just getting a different view that.
Well, I'm saying, is it when it compiles? Is it compiling into three different?
Oh yes. So yes, you're right. You've got the Windows 8 and the Windows Phone. So each one does get compiled into its own separate binary, yes.
Is there a third binary that's the DLL for the shared?
No, the shared gets projected into it. So it's as if each one has its own copy of the shared library. Even though there's only one, that gets pushed out into both.
It's linked in.
Yeah. So
I've heard that DLLs are a dying breed nowadays. Is that what this is all about, projection? Or?
No, dynamic DLL, which stands for Dynamic Link Library, is just a container for behavior. So no. Yeah, that is not something that's going to be going away because, you know, whatever platform you're building, there's going to be libraries that you're going to be pulling in, and that's essentially the same thing. It's just a different name. So that concept is not going away. Anyway, so getting back to what I was saying that I finally got working, we built the view model, and that view model now has the ability to say, whenever I'm being used, go ahead and fill yourself with some sample data. So when we open up this project in Blend, the main view model is now available, and I can then take that list of colors and drop it into my view, and you can see it automatically recognizes that I've got groups of information that not only represent the individual groups, but also represent the individual list of colors. Where did this come from? This is just sample data. I just populated it with a bunch of random colors. Now, why don't you see the colors? Because it doesn't know everything that you're doing. We have to tell it what is it that we actually want to use. So within Blend, we have the ability to then edit the template that represents each one of these individual boxes. And when we do that, we can then take the individual components of that box. Let me zoom in so you can see what's happening. What I'm doing now is I'm editing the template for each one of the items. And that each one of the items is comprised of a border, which represents the background. Oops. And it also has a text box, which represents the name of the color, and another text box that represents the subtitle that we're not using that just gets generated by default. And so how do we make this useful? Well, let's tell our template what the data means. So if I go then to the properties section, I have a whole bunch of properties like width, height, alignment, whatever. But an important thing to what we're doing is the background brush. And that background brush can then be bound to a property in our view model. What property do we want to bind in our view model? The color. So we tell it, create a data binding for the background. And when we do that, Blend is smart enough to know that the backing view model has these properties. So here's the color info that we defined earlier. Here's the brush, here's the color, and here's the name. Which one do we want? In this case, we want the brush because that's what represents the color. And when I do that and I hit OK, look at what happens. Every one of those colors, where did it go? Where did you go? There we go. The colors that we created are instantly bound to our template. So this interaction between Blend and our view model allows us to then define our bindings in a visual way.
Is this updating your view file as you're editing it?
Yes, because right now we're inside of Blend. If I flip back to Visual Studio, what's going to happen? It's going to tell us, where did I go? Where did I go? Where did I go? Oh, I haven't saved. Let me save. Save file, save all. If I flip back to Visual Studio, what happens? It tells me, hey, something happened, reload. Now if I then go to the view inside of Visual Studio, I see the exact same thing. But if I wasn't inside of Blend, I would have to go inside of all of this HTML and manually change it. But if you look at what happened before, this is what we had before, this blank page. When I made those changes in Blend, it added all of this for me.
Is there a reason why it's color-coded differently, that section? Just out of curiosity.
Yes, because it's not being used. This is just Blend generates a lot of information that you may or may not use depending on what you're doing. It gives you a starting point to let you not worry about the little typing and all that stuff, and then you can throw away what you don't need or change what you need, And so that's what Blend lets you do, is that it kind of gives you a visual connection between the view that represents your application and the data that represents the data in your application. So if just to kind of give you an idea, this is the actual finished product. So I've got an additional screen here with a colors page. When you pick a page, it takes you into there, and it's really the same thing. If I open this up in Blend, you can see that it's just a collection of bindings. I've got the view model. Let me zoom in here. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. My zoom's not working.
Try Control Plus.
No. No. Oh, maybe I can't do it in Blend. I don't know. So it's really the same thing. In this case now, since I'm in a different view, I now have a different view model, and that's the colors page view model, and that has a single list of colors, because when you select a color, it's going to take you then into that group. And so you can see how it's, you define your view model, you define your view, and then Blend lets you connect them together. Make sense? And what's really cool about Blend is that it really does let you bind things. If in this case, if I wanted to change the subtitle, let me zoom in here so you can see it. If for whatever reason I had a property inside of my view model that represented that subtitle, I can then select the subtitle and then go into its text and bind that, create a data binding, and let's go ahead and just call it let's also call it the color value. So you can see here now, here's the hex value for that color. And so it presents it to you in a way where you can just kind of point and click and select what you want. Well, the first two are the opacity. So it's the opacity and then the actual hex color. So this is really where it really helps you to define that, because when I drag that grouping on there, it put everything into the groups just like I wanted. But in Windows Phone, maybe I don't want to necessarily see a grouping. And this is where the whole universal concept comes in. On a device, on a little phone, maybe I don't necessarily want to see something this expansive because I only have a little bit of real estate. And in that case, when I drag my view model, let me go ahead and copy it on there. Main page view model. I'm going to put this into the Windows Phone main view. So when I drag my view model onto the Windows Phone,
you're dragging it onto, what is that area? The grid.
Yeah, because remember that the grid is the only item on our surface. So if I'm going to drag anything into anything, I'm going to drag it into the grid. Yeah, it's basically your root container, and it doesn't have to be a grid. It can be a canvas. It can be a stack panel. It can be different containers, but the grid is the default one.
You have multiple grids jump between them? Or
you have to have one root element, but within that you can put multiple.
Can you have multiple screens, so like jumping between forms?
Yes. Yes, you can have as many views as you want, and in the finished product you can see that there's 2 views that you can jump between. But in this case, we don't want to drag the grouping on there because we have so little real estate. So let's just drag the actual groups on there. And when we do that, oh, did I miss? There. So now we're just showing the list of groups. And this corresponds to these guys. Group 1, Group 2, the high-level groups. We're not going to show all of the individual colors within that group because we only have a limited real estate. And again, you can think of this as, like say a newspaper application. On a tablet, you've got all the room in the world, so you'll show headlines and a couple of articles, and then you'll show top stories and a couple of articles, and US news and a couple of articles. But on the Windows Phone, you have a little bit less real estate, so maybe here you'll just see, headlines, sports, local, and then they can click on that and go deeper.
Well, I guess if you wanted to have the same interface, you had to, you had to change the layout so that if you want group 1 and then all the individual colors, instead of being, squares, you'd have to be a rect flex.
Exactly. Yes, and that is where, but the really cool part of this and where the whole power of this universal app concept comes from is that if you notice, when I dragged that on there, I got the exact same information. I just presented it in a different way. So if I wanted to, absolutely I could show, in a horizontal list underneath, maybe 4 of those colors in, so you could tap it and go into details. I could even make it in a pivot where you slide from tab to tab. Instead of being horizontal, you've got 8 groups that you kind of tab over. But you don't have to change anything in your actual data because this list of groups is the same list of groups that's here. So as long as you've got your shared project that contains the actual data, that contains the actual behavior, when you're actually building the user interface, you just project that data into whatever interface makes sense for the device. And again, if you want, you can then edit the template here in Blend. And then you can tell it, okay, well, in this border color, I want to go ahead and bind that brush again by creating a data binding to the group color and have it automatically show up. And these are the same colors that would be presented to the tablet view. So that's the idea here, is that when you create an application in Windows using the universal app model, if you follow the paradigm of, especially like MVVM, where you define the data, you define the behavior completely independently of your application, you can then project that behavior into any user interface that you want. You can even reuse it in things like Xamarin, in iOS, in Android, by just creating the interface that works in those platforms, but reusing this data. And so you build your application once, and then you just build the user interfaces for the different platforms.
Is there a .NET port for those other mobile devices?
You mean Android and iOS? Yeah. Yes. Xamarin is the prevailing tool for that if you're using C#. Yeah. Now, if you're like using JavaScript and you're using Cordova or you're using a web view, that's a completely different paradigm, and still gives you that same kind of ability to target different devices, but it is a totally different this is a totally different approach for developing that. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that I really hope to get into, but the entire working project is checked into GitHub. Please pull it down. There's what I really hope to accomplish with this project was to have absolutely nothing in the project that wasn't being used by the project. So there's no fluff, there's no additional libraries, there's nothing if you open up and you're like, what does this do? It's not being used. It's not in there. There's absolutely nothing in this project that's not being used. So if you pull down the project and you start looking into what it's doing, every one of those things is being used by the application to generate the different interfaces. So I definitely encourage you to just download it, run it on your application, and see what's happening behind the scenes. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't really get into, including how, in this case, if you look over here on the left, you see how we've got a back button right here. On a tablet, obviously, there's no back button, but on a phone, there is. So how do you handle that? Well, you do that by putting in the back button code in your Windows Phone project, but not in your Windows 8 project. And if you look at the project when you do that, if you open up the application, you'll see that I've got here a hardware buttons back pressed that is only present in the Windows Phone project. It's not present on the Windows 8 project. And conversely, the back button that's on the view for the back page, that's only present on the Windows 8 project. So you're able to kind of target the two different platforms by putting the stuff that makes sense only inside of those heads, and everything else that is totally shared, you put it in the shared project so that you only have to write it once. So, yeah, that's it. I mean, I would love to dive deeper, but good God.
For some reason, I had believed that like Microsoft, it was its own little world. But after seeing this, it's pretty like, I would say probably about 90% similar to what I'm used to now, because it's similar paradigms from what I'm comfortable with, I guess, already. So I could probably see myself creating a Windows app now because I get it. It's not 100% new. It's actually maybe 10% new. In particular, I guess it's Visual Studio that you have to get used to, I guess. But everything else is pretty standard. Data binding right now is the hot deal, right? Like that's what's making development easier and faster.
Yeah, and it's one of the great things about Visual Studio and Blend is that, and Microsoft is that these tools were not built to dictate how you should build applications. These tools were built based on the feedback of developers on how they build their applications and how the tools should work. So Visual Studio itself was built using these tools. And so they realize how developers work. And once you really get into it, you realize how intuitive it really is. So it's definitely not a foreign language. It's definitely one of those things that just takes a little bit of ramping up. And once you get the hang of it, you know, that you really do. It really does make sense. And the only thing that I would really add is I presented this same slide last time, and I'll put it up with the source code for this. Microsoft Virtual Academy. It is a free service, a free website where experts and evangelists and developers from Microsoft go, and they sit down in front of a camera and they do exactly what I just did, except a million times better because they know what they're doing. And they take you from like the entire base. They will block out an entire day, 8 hours, 8 modules, where they will just go from soup to nuts, beginning to end, building applications, going through Blend, showing you how to use all of these tools. And if you really, I mean, if you want to dive deeper into how you can learn how to do this, you will not find a better starting point than Microsoft Virtual Academy. It's free. Take an hour out of every day to just watch one of the modules, and you will be astounded how much you will learn from these people. They are so good at what they do. And they will show you how to build apps, build Windows Phone apps, build Windows Store apps, and they present it in a way that really lets you hit the ground running. So if you do nothing else, check out Microsoft Virtual Academy. You will definitely learn a lot.
Doesn't Falafel Software also have something?
We are absolutely Falafel Software. We are. I think I took that slide out. Damn. We are a consulting company. If you want to learn more, or if the company that you work for is looking for training, is looking for mentoring, or has something that they need to build that they don't have time to build, contact us. This is what we do all day, every day for companies all around the world. And yeah, we'll be happy to help you. So, sorry to throw so much information at you. That didn't work 90% of the time. But if you have questions, please send me a message. Reach me on the Twitter or through my blog, and go into the GitHub, grab the source code, run it, and send me any questions. I'm happy and willing to help anybody learn about visual Windows development. Thank you for hanging out.
All right, well, let's thank our lecturer.